Welcome back, everybody. I am glad to say I think we're finally ready to put the lathe back together and reinstall all of the clutch parts and get this thing back up and running. It's been kind of annoying to not have a lathe. There's been some projects I need to get done that aren't getting done because the machine's out of service. And it's taken a while for a couple of suppliers to get in gear and get things to me. Part of that's probably related. I think everyone's moving just a little bit slower. You can see that with Amazon, for instance. You know, normal deliveries that are overnight for me are a month out. So there's some of that impact, but what do you do? So I think we have everything we need. There's a little bit of prep work we need to do, and then we'll start pressing in bearings into the big pulley there. So first things first, let's get some wipers, and we'll get that cleaned off with acetone so there's no debris or no grease remnants or solvent remnants or anything like that. I think our next step is going to be to put the new bearing in the outside end of this housing. So this is the piece that we had to make a new plug for on this side, and then these are the grease inlet and relief channels. So got a made in Japan NTN bearing, and this is a model 88508. It's a little bit unusual in my experience anyway. So the inner race is a fair bit wider than the outer race. So we will go ahead and just take a torch to this on the arbor press and just warm this guy up just a little bit, reduce the amount of stress and force that's needed to drive this guy in. Another good reason to get your parts nice and clean. The thing's not smoking. Okay. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Okay, we're going with Loctite 567. Seemed like a good option for the application. Here's our little pipe plug. As usual with pipe dope, I put 3 times too much on, but it's not going to leak. All right, this is the part I've been most worried about, just because it's a bit complicated compared to the other stuff we've been doing. So I've asked around and looked online for opinions on the best strategy. Someone in the comments last video or the video before said they recommended putting a bolt through the entire stack and driving it in all at once. I spoke to someone who is absolutely an expert in this, and their suggestion was to just get each one started by itself, and then once this guy is below that shoulder, to put the next one on and then push it with basically in those kinds of increments, as opposed to trying to stack everything up and push it all down at once. So that's what I'm going to go with. I trust their opinion very much. As prescribed, these are still sealed. I don't know how tight to expect. Just so happened that this nice big chunk of 4140 was about the right size. Okay, that was all just with the hand wheel, so not much pressure at all to get to that point. I'll use the lever for that. Okay. So far, so good. It's kind of what I was expecting. There's not much resistance, but it is definitely a press fit. Okay, here's our spacer. That one fits in fairly easily. So pressing here is really just going to be pushing the bearing in, and this guy is just in the way. Okay. So what I'm going to do, and this may not be a best practice, but it seems to make a lot of sense, is I'm going to go ahead and load some grease into these things. So this system will, the channels in that, the other bearing retainer will fill up with grease, and then the grease will push through this hole into the gap between the two spacers and then fill up the bearings and everything. So if I leave these kind of dry for now and then just force everything through there with the grease gun, it'll probably take the rest of my life. So I'm going to at least get started on that and squirt in some grease onto the bearings before we get it fully assembled. There may be a really good reason not to do this, but I don't know what it is, so I'm going to make a mistake if that's what it turns out to be. Okay, looks pretty good. So we've got a beveled and then a square shoulder snap ring. So we'll put the square shoulder one on this side. A little bit more. There we go. Okie doke, that actually looks about perfect. I don't know that I'm gonna have to adjust anything. So what I measured before was 1.5 thousandths between the spacer and each bearing. So, a little bit more than that. So I think what we can do is press from the other side very, very, very gently. I'm not all that experienced, but I do know better than to press bearings against a snap ring. Seems about perfect. I think I can live with that. Okay, so we've got our beveled edge snap ring. So we want to have that in to where if it doesn't go in all the way, it's still going to push up against this bearing properly. As I understand it, that's the idea behind a beveled edge bearing. Okay. Well, seems like it worked out okay. All right, this is the back side. So I've got the snap rings in the same orientation they were in when I took them apart. If they were done incorrectly before by someone or by the guy at the factory, then oh well, we'll survive. But yeah, just a little bit of freedom for that spacer to move around is exactly what it was when I took it apart. And those bearings seemed perfectly fine. It just didn't make sense to leave those old bearings in there since I was going all this way anyhow. So I think now this can actually go back on the lathe and on that bearing carrier. One thing before we actually get this guy on, I want to go ahead and install the grease fitting. And what we'll do is pump some grease in as it will normally function, and we should get some grease coming out of here, and just to make sure everything's working correctly. I believe it's on this near side here that the intake comes out. Yeah, we're starting to see, I bet you can't see it, but there is just a tiny bit of grease poking through. One more pump and then pop. Okay, so that line is currently full. And what I'm going to do is put this grease fitting on the relief valve side, just so we can do the same thing and make sure it's full of grease, and if there's any contaminants in there that I may have missed, the grease will force it out, and we can evacuate it that way. Probably looks pretty bad, but I am just using the weight of the hammer basically to tap that on. It's not much of a press fit. So basically we need to get back to where we can put the snap ring on the bearing, the inner bearing holder. Oh, there we go. Sounds pretty good to me. And here's our smaller snap ring. Shaft spins just like it did before, and that guy rotates nice and free.